Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. In this video, we're going to discuss systemic racism in Australia. But of course, this isn't just for Australia. This is for UK. This is for America, France. These are for the Western countries. But I'm going to discuss Australia in particular. So let's look at this article from the news.
Allegedly chasing them with a metal pole. Police on a Doveton street after allegedly chasing them with a metal pole is an immigration detainee on multiple counts of bail. He received a visa following a controversial 2023 High Court decision, today sparking a war of words on the election campaign. Lana Murphy has more.
Police say the only thing that could stop Marcy Ayik was a bullet. This video captured moments after officers shot him in the armpit on Saturday morning. They were called to a fight at a woman's home in Doveton and say Ayik threatened them, then chased them for 30 metres with a metal pole. The 33-year-old was on 5 counts of bail and is a former immigration detainee, one of 291 criminals released into the community after a High Court ruling in 2023. The court found indefinite detention was unlawful if prisoners were stateless or had no real prospect of deportation.
We want these people out of the country, but you can't override the High Court, and that is just something that we have had to deal with. Peter Dutton would have had to deal with the same thing.
Police say Mr Ayik was granted a bridging visa in December 2023, but continued to offend. He was charged with family violence offences, wasn't living where he was meant to, failed to appear in court and breached his reporting obligations 21 times. He was meant to be wearing an ankle bracelet, but during this arrest, police discovered he'd taken it off.
Look at what's happening in Victoria at the moment, where we've seen the government's disastrous policies in relation to NZYQ play out.
Mr Ayik was charged with a number of offences, including assaulting police, but he wants to apply for bail again. The court heard he poses a risk to the public, but he'll get his opportunity tomorrow. Lana Murphy, 9 News.
So I went straight to the comments to expose all of these racists. So Matthew Lauder says, "So why did you let them in the country in the first place? Send them back home." And he got 80 likes for it. And I replied sarcastically back and I said, "They thought he may turn out to be a gout. You know, that Australian young sprinter that's doing amazing. He's even compared to Usain Bolt. So, yeah, and look how they crumble and have a meltdown in the comments. John Coleman writes, Gout is an Australian. He was born here. This guy is an import courtesy of the Labor government, and our crime has increased since." So I wrote back and I said, if Gout had taken a deeper path crime instead of gold medals, Australia wouldn't be celebrating his inspiring journey. His birth certificate would vanish from relevance. Headlines would read like hit pieces, and the public would scramble to trace the blame straight to his migrant parents, as if their mere arrival planted the seed of failure. His name would be shorthand for "we told you so" in every racist comment thread from here to Canberra. The same story that now fuels national pride would be twisted into parable of multicultural regret. This is the price of importing the third world, not a fallen athlete, but an imported liability. John Coleman writes back and says, "That's rubbish, and you know it. This guy was here as an illegal, broke the laws numerous times. He was out on bail. He is lucky he isn't 6 foot under trying to attack a police officer. He and people like him should be deported. A referendum agreed by the people of Australia would make sure people like this does get deported, because it will go in the Constitution, and that's what should happen." My response, It's funny how the whole deportation idea only seems to pop up when the person doesn't look like the approved version of Australia. If he had come from the UK, you'd be calling him one of us. But since his skin is a different shade, suddenly it's a crime to exist. Maybe it's not about the law at all, just about who you want to scapegoat today. A little consistency would be nice, but hey, it's always easier to throw the outsider under the bus, right? And what does Joanne say? She says, "You are talking rubbish. Have a good day." They totally ran away. They didn't want to talk anymore. So I responded and said, bringing up the deep issue of systemic racism in this country, I wrote, a major Australian newspaper recently reported that the name Singh has taken over Smith as the most common surname in certain regions. An article presented under the guise of statistical reporting, and this was mentioned by the Herald Sun. However, it's worth examining the intent and implication behind such a publication. This type of coverage can be seen as a subtle form of racial messaging, one that suggests demographic change is a threat rather than a natural outcome of immigration and multicultural development. Would the media have drawn similar attention if the shift had moved in the opposite direction? It's unlikely. The selective emphasis seems designed to provoke unease or a sense of cultural loss among certain segments of the population. What's particularly striking is the historical irony. The same voices that now express concern over being replaced were notably silent when Indigenous communities were displaced, marginalised, and replaced during colonisation. True national identity should evolve through inclusivity, reflection, and historical awareness, not be shaped by fear-driven narratives masked as statistical curiosity. Systemic racism in Australia is deeply entrenched, and one only needs to observe public discourse, particularly on social media, to see how it manifests. When a person of Indian or Muslim background commits a crime, the reaction is often immediate and predictable. Deport them back to India or send them back to the Middle East. Yet when someone of Italian, Greek, or other European heritage is involved in similar criminal behaviour, those same calls for deportation are conspicuously absent. This discrepancy reveals a troubling bias. Individuals with darker skin tones or non-Western religious affiliations are judged more harshly, not only for their actions but for their identity. This double standard illustrates how racism in Australia often hides behind conversations about immigration or law and order. The issue is not simply about religion or crime, it's about race and how some communities are more readily othered than others. Even with Aboriginal Australians who cannot be told to go back to where they've come from due to their ancestral ties to the land, one senses that if were possible, similar sentiments would be directed their way. This further highlights how entrenched racial bias remains in the national psyche. A common rebuttal to accusation of racism is that religion isn't a race. While technically accurate, this response often serves as a deflection. The reality is that people do conflate religion, ethnicity, and skin color, and this fusion underpins many of the prejudice attitudes seen online in wider society. For example, Muslims are almost exclusively associated with Arab nations, despite large Muslim populations who come from places like Indonesia or the Balkans. When an African, Indian, Muslim, or Asian person appears in a crime report, the comment sections are often flooded with calls for tighter immigration policies and deportation. However, when someone of Irish, Greek, or Italian descent is involved, such reactions are rare, despite the fact that their families also once migrated here. This selective outrage isn't just a matter of individual bias, it points to a broader systemic issue in how Australians perceive identity, belonging, and justice. Furthermore, this is a common narrative suggesting that immigration from developed nations leads to a decline in societal standards, often phrased as invite the third world, become the third world. However, a closer look at numerous incidents involving individuals of Anglo-European descent within Australia challenges this stereotype. I'll put a hyperlink below this video and you can see white people do public indecency, white person one punch attack, white person drug bust, white person Australian drug traffickers foreign countries, white man beating up a taxi driver, white people terrorizing neighborhoods, white person does a home invasion, white people trashing Australia, white people steals a fish from an aquarium, white Anglo tries to kidnap and rape, white woman beating up other white women at a shopping mall, white mother leaves her baby in a vehicle, white man attacks a kebab shop, white man beat up each other, white man does a home invasion with a machete, white man does a drug smuggling, white man pedophilia, sex with minors, white people pulls out a machete, white people how they treat public transport, white man takes a shotgun on a plane and does a terror attack in Australia, white man brawling on public transport, white person animal abuse, white man sexual harassment, white man sexual assault, white man beats his wife, 500 white youth trash a holiday home, white politician steals $170,000 from an Australian taxpayer, mass shootings, for example, in the United States. Majority of the mass shootings that happen in the United States are predominantly reporting from white people. Number of mass shootings in the United States in 1982 to September 2024 by shooter, race and ethnicity. Vast majority of the population are white, and you can see the graph there. While it's crucial to avoid generalization, data indicates that white individuals have been responsible for a larger percentage of mass public shootings in the United States, including those at schools, than other racial groups. We can talk about the French clergy abuse. Over 200,000 children have been abused since the 1950s. From public indecency and violent assaults to drug trafficking, political corruption, and other serious crimes, it's evident that criminal behavior is not confined to any one ethnicity or background. These examples highlight the issue affecting public safety, morality, and community values are not imported. They exist across all demographics, including the majority population. Perhaps it's time to rethink these oversimplified, racially charged narratives and acknowledge that the challenges facing our society stem from broader systemic issues rather than from cultural or ethnic diversity alone. Please do go ahead and like, share and subscribe, and also visit the hyperlink below where all this information can be obtained in detail with graphs, links and further information talking about even codified Islamophobia and racism. So take a look. Please enjoy. Thank you.